We're just giving a few moments for to get on. And folks should be receiving a panelist invitation. That does not mean that we expect you to do a presentation. It means that you will have access to video. That is, since we're using GoToWebinar as our platform, you need to accept the panelist invitation. And I'm not sure if it'll say panelist, but you should have a window with a link to join via video, and it may be called panelist. So please accept that. That just means you can join us via video. Good. I'm seeing a lot of conversions too.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello. All right. You're right.
Hi.
Hello. How's everyone doing?
Good. How are you, Rick Harris?
I'm good. Just trying to get everything situated here.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, happy to. I do need to warn you, I may have to dive off for 2 minutes for a phone call, but I will promise I will be back on.
Great. Looks like there's some more videos popping on. We'll go ahead and get started. I know folks are still coming on. Welcome to the second of our virtual regional member meetings. This is the first year to do regional member meetings virtually. I've mentioned be on the lookout for folks who are just coming on for an invitation to be a panelist. That just means you're joining by video. We'd love to have everyone who can to accept that invitation and join us via video. We'll present some data, but otherwise we'd like to hear your reflections throughout the conversation and really feel like our introductions will benefit and our discussion will benefit, be better over video. So, and then, I'm Jessica Love. I'm the Executive Director for Prosperity Indiana. We have a number of team members on this morning. I see Rita, if you'll wave to everyone. And then Rita is our engagement director. We have Michaela, who is serving as an AmeriCorps and managing the platform for us today. Thanks, Michaela. I'm not sure if Teresa is on. There are a lot of boxes here. Teresa, if you're on, wave. And then Carrie, if you are on, wave as well. And then I'll hand it over to Andrew to do some later introductions. Andrew is our policy director.
So good morning, everybody. Yes, I believe that we have 3 of our state representatives with us here this morning. So let me introduce each of them and give them a chance to say hello. And then there'll be an opportunity later to have more of an in-depth policy discussion. But first we have Representative Earl Harris of East Chicago. Representative Harris represents District 2, which is portions of Lake County. Good morning. Thanks for joining us, Representative Harris.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
We also have Representative Lisa Beck from Lake of the Four Seasons. She represents District 19, which is portions of Lake and Porter County. Thank you for joining us, Representative Beck. And then we also have registered Representative Chris Chung of Dyer, which Representative Chung represents District 15, which is portions of Lake County. So thank you for joining us as well. Were there any other of our General Assembly members who ended up joining us today? Just want to make sure we recognize everybody on the line. Okay, I think that's it. Thanks, Jessica.
Thanks, Andrew. And then we also invited foundations, funders to join us today, some that are not members. And Brianne Hooker from Jasper Newton Foundation. Brianne, if you're here, give a wave. And then Linda Yoder from Community Foundation of Marshall County, and Linda, member through United Way over the years, and then also Kelly Ano from the Legacy Foundation, and those last two are both members of ours. And so other members of ours who are on the call, or at least who have registered today, if you'll briefly just introduce yourselves when I call your name, and then tell us, in addition to your name, tell us your position, organization you're with, and then we recognize that a lot of people are suffering right now. But if you could identify one silver lining for COVID-19, we would invite you to, when you're introducing yourself, just to say one word, and if it needs like a little one sentence explainer so we can keep our introductions moving, we'd appreciate that. I think for us, what we've seen as a silver lining at Prosperity is the collaborations that have formed. So collaboration would be my one word. And we have worked with different groups that we've never worked with, or gone deeper with groups that we have worked with in the past. And so we'll move on. Is Clarence on? Clarence, if you're on, will you intro yourself and provide a silver lining? Okay. I'm looking for Michaela's nod or no nod. Okay. Elizabeth.
Hi, it's me, I think. Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth. I'm with South Bend Heritage Foundation in South Bend, Indiana. I am the Director of Marketing and Strategy, so I basically do everything. And I guess I would definitely agree with collaboration as a silver lining. And I would also say that it's been a very innovative time to think of new solutions to problems that we didn't even know existed.
Great, thank you. Eric, are you on? We'll circle back if you join. Is Anna on? I keep scrolling my video. Not seeing Anna yet. Marianne. And Tim. Okay, Mark Gould, I saw you. Mark, introduce yourself in a silver lining, if you would. Oh, you're on mute, Mark.
All right, I'm still learning technology, so sorry. I'm Mark Gould. I'm the with the First Source Bank Community Development Manager based in South Bend, Indiana. I guess the silver lining is I'm starting to learn, getting a little better at virtual technology. So not quite there yet, but I think I'm getting, if you would have asked me 6 months ago, much better shape now than previously. So I guess that's one silver lining.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Kathy Shue, introduce yourself in a silver lining, Kathy.
Sure. My name is Kathy Schuth. I'm also in South Bend. I'm executive director of a community development corporation called Near Northwest Neighborhood. We're a neighborhood-based group. We work on affordable housing and community engagement. So the community engagement has slowed down quite a bit, but the silver lining has really been generosity. I think that would be my word. Where I would say neighbors have both more time and interest in sharing resources with each other.
Great, thank you. I'm not seeing Ann. Ann Mannix, are you on? Okay. Jordan?
Yes, good morning. I'm Jordan Stanfill. I'm the CEO of Housing Opportunities. We're a nonprofit based in Valparaiso who provides affordable housing and shelter for people experiencing homelessness. And my silver lining is we've still been able to set up a safe recovery site for people who are homeless and exposed to COVID or test positive in the homeless population, and working in collaboration with a bunch of other nonprofits to do that. So that's been great to see.
Thank you. Who did I miss? I think I've missed some folks, and I want to make sure that others can speak. And I want to invite our both our members and non-members that are from foundations to identify and use silver linings that you might see as well. Kelly, I see you're on the line if you want to do that.
Sure. So I'm Kelly Eno. I'm the Vice President at Legacy Foundation. I would say the silver lining that I have seen is the adaptability of our communities, and especially the nonprofits that we work with, how quickly they've been able to pivot and adapt to this new environment and shift their priorities and really step up and provide the services to our community.
Right. I think Ann Mannix has joined. Ann, are you on? And we're just introducing ourselves and identifying a silver lining of COVID-19.
Oh, hi, I'm Ann Mannix. I'm a housing consultant. The name of my company is Neighborhood Development Associates. I'm happy to be on this meeting. I guess a silver lining, I enjoy having fewer meetings and having time to work in my office. I think I might be a little more productive. But.
Great. Thank you, Ann. And then, Cindy, did we have you introduce yourself?
Yeah, this is Mark Gould. I'd like to introduce Cindy Kirkham, works with me at First Source Bank. Cindy, is your microphone on?
It is now. Hi, I'm Cindy Kirkham with First Source Bank. I'm Community Development Analyst working with Mark. I would say the silver lining for me would be innovation. I'm loving this technology, and like Ann Mannix said, being able to get more done and still have almost the same amount of meetings has been very, very nice.
Mary Ann, have you introduced yourself? I'm getting a little feedback. Yeah. If there's anyone I missed, raise your hand, and we'd love to hear from you. And okay, great. And I can't see Brianne. Did I see Brianne?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good morning. Brianne Hooker with the Jasper Newton Foundation, the community foundation that serves Jasper and Newton counties. Silver lining, this is like a trick question. So I would say I've discovered a new group of people and developed some deeper relationships with the nonprofits we work with. So a new group of people who answer the phone when I call the first time. So that's been kind of exciting to have those partnerships. So good.
That's wonderful. Anybody else want to introduce themselves and offer offer a silver lining if you haven't already?
Yeah, this is Linda Yoder, and I would have to agree. It's been an opportunity for us to throw out some legacy processes and just rethink how we do our granting and how we're responding in this environment. And on a personal note, I have a grandson that's a senior in high school and has his driver's license and limited opportunity to social networks. So he's discovered it's great to golf with Nana on the weekends.
That is a silver lining. Perfect. Anyone else? Okay. And so, now that we all know each other, I specifically want to give everyone permission to do the things that you would have done if we were in person. So I had team members, after we did the first one of these things, say they didn't feel like they could drink for the entirety of the session. So we're going to take the first sip. I think we're cheesily going to do this together, everyone. Rita's got a Diet Coke. I've got some water, some coffee around the room. Okay.
Feel free.
So do it now. Feel free to do that at any point. We would have offered you at least coffee, water, probably muffins or bagels or, donuts. So if you have any of that, you're welcome to that as well. You're not on TV. You're in a meeting. So just want to give that permission. And then we've done those introductions. We'll go through our COVID-19 survey results. We'll also talk through our policy priority survey results and where it is to date. We want to have conversation as we're going in response to some of the data that we're presenting to you. And then we have a few action items meeting with. And so just for next slide, we'll get to who is Prosperity. For those who aren't members, just wanted to do a quick rundown of who we are. We've been around since 1986. We rebranded to Prosperity Indiana in 2016, and we are intentionally a cross-sector network focused on community economic development statewide. Next slide, please. And so, the bulk of our membership are other nonprofits, but we have a number of banking and private developer members that are in the affordable housing field, as well as units of government. We have some of those, I think, represented on our call today, as well as legislators that are here. So in terms of our mission, on the next slide, we outline our mission around a focus on resources, engagement, and advocacy that's needed to support our network, and the work that you all are doing really to create inclusive opportunities to improve quality of life for Hoosiers. Next slide. And so we also amended our vision in 2019 and added some values that are really important to us. And we've leaned heavily on these in these uncertain times. A lot of conversations around equity and injustice and our changes that we made in our identity to be able to communicate that ahead of this has been helpful in guiding us. And helping us grow. And then on the next slide, we really think of our resources, engagement, and advocacy work through our REAP framework. We have a number of signature programs that address asset building, payday loan alternatives, social determinants of health grant funding, affordable rental housing, opportunity zone investment, as well as outcomes measurement tracking tool for nonprofits who are doing collective impact work. So I encourage you to explore prosperityindiana.org to learn more. And then we'll move on to the next slide, the next couple of slides, where we'll talk about our COVID-19 impact on Indiana organizations. So on the next slide, you'll see we conducted this in May. Close to 135 organizations responding. And wanted to call attention on the next slide to the fact that the majority of our respondents have budgets in the $1 million to just under $5 million. So they're mid-sized organizations that are making up the bulk of the response. And of those respondents, more than 75% are nonprofit, which is actually a greater percentage than we have in our membership. It still is pretty reflective of the fact that we are heavily a nonprofit association, and others that are in our membership come alongside our work. So on the impact slide, next slide, at the time of the survey, nearly 50% of our respondents had less than 3 months of cash reserve on hand. And so, those who had budget under $250,000, the majority had less than a month or 1 to 3 months of reserve. Those with the $250,000 to just under $1 million generally had 1 to 6 months of reserve. The ones that are in like the $1 million to $4.9 million range budget, that's where we saw the bulk of these 10 plus months of reserve. So it's kind of a sweet spot within that budget range. And then when we looked at the 5 million to just under 10 million, most indicated having less than a month of those who responded. And then that 10 to 24 had 1 to 6, and the highest group of 25 million and up really had an equal distribution of 1 to 3 and 10 plus and a few 4 to 6. So I go over all that to quickly point out that, it brought out to me to the forefront that economic susceptibility of all organizations, really, that budget size does not necessarily indicate an organization's sustainability threshold. And I think a lot of that does have to do with grant funding restrictions. A lot of money flows into nonprofits, and a lot flows right back out, without a bunch of buffer to increase the organization's long-term sustainability. And so, it's no surprise where you're seeing that budgetary implications are being considered by close to 75% of our respondents. And staff layoffs and furloughs and reduced programs are part of those considerations, for some. And of course, there's no surprise that events have changed and supply chain and services and volunteers have all been impacted and negatively impacted by the pandemic. And that can contribute to further budgetary strain if this, continues to go on. And so on the next slide, and we'll stay here for a minute, that you'll see that 82% indicated when they completed this in May that they expected a decrease in their revenue. And so they would need to lean on some of these reserves that they have. And then 94% indicated a moderate to high impact on their program, their services or general operations. And, when this was captured in May, we honestly had no clue that we wouldn't see a dip in cases between then and the fall, like we were told. And now we're hearing that there might not be a dip, in cases. So those are kind of the things that we wanted to start with and opening up a time to reflect with those of you just on what we found. Are there any surprises in what I've shared so far? Or is this right on with what you're seeing in your community? So I'd love for 2 or 3 folks to at least speak out about your experience and how it's compared to what we've talked about in terms of impact so far. Open mic night on the.
I think that, I think this lines up with what we've seen, and so I don't see that there's any surprises in the data or the feedback that you received.
Is anyone seeing things improve more than you expected, since May, or worsen? They're worse than what you thought you would see at that point. I don't have a way of knowing who informed, who on the call informed this survey at the moment, but curious about where you thought you'd be now in May, or and where we are.
I thought we would be back to normal by now, but at least if you asked me back in March or April.
Yeah, I know. I look back at some earlier emails, and it's just funny what the things I was saying in April about getting back. Right. We'll meet in person in May, and we just, a lot of uncertainty. But I think the only certainty now is that things are uncertain, and that we're going with that flow. Is there anything missing? As an impact on, that you're seeing in your organization that's not really captured in what we have in these data points here? I'd love to hear just what folks are doing differently, as a result of COVID. And we talked about some silver linings, maybe if you can go deeper in some of those.
Well, this is Kathy. I would say one of the things that we're experiencing now is, or I guess where it's like new realms of uncertainty are beginning to open, especially regarding construction and affordable housing. But as you know, we're all aware that like the eviction moratoriums are ending and that the utility moratoriums are ending. So I would say it's like we're kind of keying ourselves for paying attention again to the impact on neighbors, where it seems like they've had more things catching them with unemployment and with other benefits that have been available that are now beginning to go away. And also we're starting to really hear about supply chain problems in construction and construction material costs going up. So it just seems like the delayed uncertainty is rippling now in a way that I think is going to continue to impact us for quite a long time, and in ways that we really aren't sure of yet. That wasn't a silver lining. Sorry.
No, I mean, this is the experience, right? I mean, there's no pressure for it to be one thing or another. That reminded me that one of the things I did see in the survey results and some of those higher budget groups, and yet expressed some of the most uncertainty, and thought that they would experience some loss, were the ones that have affordable housing properties, and so the impact of not receiving rent is being felt by nonprofits who are, affordable housing property owners as well. I mean, we've seen that the biggest impact, I think, is around market rate, but still, I mean, it's impacting bottom lines for our members that are nonprofits that are accustomed to being paid timely for rent and are not seeing that as much. So. And then on the next slide, what I think is important to note regarding how organizations are responding is nonprofits are adapting. We've heard that in what's been brought out in some of the conversation today. For one, many nonprofits are busier than ever. I know we feel like we are, but it doesn't automatically equate to having more funding just because you're busier. In fact, I think for many it speaks, I've said this before, more to the resolve of nonprofits to serve rather than having more resources, and that the data we collected also speaks to some readiness to return to the office. You can see that it's clear that people have policies and procedures, but they're not necessarily embracing a return to the office while virtual is kind of working. I feel like that's the case for us. We have a screening tool. Our screening tool's in place. Our PPE is sitting on desk. We have all the policies we need, but we're not necessarily there. Most of us are not comfortable being in the office space, so we're still operating virtually, even though we're ready when people want to be back there. So I did want to get, just curious what others are experiencing in that regard. Who's back at the office? Why are you back there? What capacity are you back in the office functioning, or how do things look different in terms of how you're serving others? Some of you look like you're in your office space. I'm just curious about moving back to that norm or whatever the new norm is.
I've been back in the office for about 3 weeks now, and we have a meeting room space, and we are one of the few places, I think, in Marshall County at this point where people feel that they can come for small meetings at least and have the option to Zoom, because we have the equipment that they can participate. If they want to come, 3 or 4 in the room, they can still participate with Zoom with others. But I will have to say, one of the reasons I'm back here more full-time than I had anticipated at this point, because our numbers were still on the rise around here until just recently. And but the internet connection at home is so poor. Our options for internet service are so poor that it just became necessary to get back in here where I had a stable connection.
Yeah, we've been back in the office for 2 months now, so since early to mid-June. And so we are limiting outside visitors, and we require masks in any common spaces. But we've been back for full staff, full time for a couple months.
What have folks done to respond and keep serving your community and your mission, during this time? And I think this will be a helpful time to hear from funders as well. What your responses look like if you're willing to share that in terms of supporting nonprofits who are still carrying out their work. So just curious where the work has adapted and where the work has remained the same and increased or decreased. And what funders have done as well.
We staff both the Community Foundation and United Way. And so one of the things that has changed for us with the Community Foundation for sure is the grant distribution rounds. We were right in the middle of reviewing applications when all of this hit in the spring. And so we recontacted every applicant to find out the status of their program, because at that point things were changing on a daily basis. And several of those applications were no longer relevant. And we ended up distributing 50% of the grant funding available that round went into our disaster relief fund, because we were anticipating already then that food insecurities, housing and utility assistance would be two of the primary areas where our communities were going to struggle the most.
And have that has matched what you anticipated, has matched what you've seen, I'm guessing.
It has. Childcare, we're keeping an eye on that. I mean, the food insecurities, last week was the first week we did not have a weekly food drop from Northern Indiana Food Bank. And we've been doing those since April, weekly food drops to supplement the funds that we're providing to food pantries across the county. But we recognized pretty quickly that the needs were on the rise still for food. So we'll be going back to weekly until we start to see those numbers decline a bit. And then we've all been watching closely what's happening as far as rent and utility assistance, mortgage assistance, and so on. We know as of the end of May, we talked to all of the cities and towns to get an idea of the number of delinquencies they had. And in a county of 46,000, we had about 525 households that had delinquent utilities at that point. And that didn't include one of our major utility companies. NIPSCO numbers were not included in that. And it didn't include rent and mortgage issues. So we were looking at already then $209,000 in delinquencies.
What about some of our private businesses? Ann or Mark, how has work looked different for you guys, or for those that you partner with regularly? Ann? Oh, I think you're still on mute. Ann, I think you're still on mute. Take her off.
Grant funds, can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can. Thank you.
Okay. There's a lot of rental assistance out there that I've seen, and we haven't really had much impact. The 466 Works, a group I work with, has been selling houses, and those have been selling amazingly enough in this environment. We have a 4% tax credit deal that's struggling because the investment rates have gone down and the credit rate's gone down. But in general, I mean, we're still writing grants, and there seems to be a lot of COVID money out there. Some of it hasn't been spent. South Bend, it has exacerbated the homeless problems, and we have an encampment, and then many people are concerned about that because of the COVID, crossover. And so that has been a heightened problem. And our mayor has set up a task force. And so far, I haven't heard what they've decided to do about the encampments, but there's a lot of concern about that.
Sure, thank you. I mean, we've heard from IHCDA at least, that they're not having a problem with home ownership with mortgage,
Right.
programs. And I mean, I think we see that probably there's the haves and the have-not, that divide is getting even wider. And so I think that's what that's representing. Is that for some folks there's relatively no impact, and then the folks who are struggling are having even more of a struggle. So
I think if I can jump in, I think when you talk about purchasing, the fact that rates have gone down is also, so if you are a have, this has actually been beneficial for you because you can now get a lower rate, which may mean easier for you to buy the size house you wanted at price, or even get something that's even larger or more expensive because of that. So that's also been a factor. And I know there's also been a lot going on with people refinancing because, again, the rates went down. So you're right. It's one of those where there's a lot of bad that has come out of this, but for some people, it's helping them depending on their situation.
absolutely. Yeah. Good context. Kelly, anything that you would share that the foundation has done in response? Anything additional that you would add?
Yeah, in response, so I think as soon as, was it Linda, I think, that mentioned one of the silver linings was being able to change our processes to things that I think we needed to do all along. And so really looking at, how quickly we could turn around grant applications, simplifying our application, giving the organization more flexibility in how they spend the funds. And so some of those changes, this was the impetus needed to be able to make those. The funding has primarily, so we did the first round, which was COVID emergency response. And those were weekly applications where we were just trying to get funding out into the communities. With that, we gave out about $350,000, and a third of that was for food. Food was the primary request that we were seeing come across. Another third was PPE, so we're keeping our people safe and healthy. So sanitizer and gloves and cleaning services. And then the other third was a mix of housing and childcare. We just had applications due on Monday for our next round, which was kind of focused on recovery. And we have not announced the awards yet, but I can say just based on the applications that it seems like a big focus there is education. So how our family's going to handle if you have parents who work while homeschooling their kids, helping the schools get through this e-learning, so providing additional resources to both the schools and the families. Seems like that's the primary, at least, direction the organizations are going.
Thank you for sharing that. And we'll move to the last couple of slides. I think some of our, we'll advance the slide. What some of our respondents said that they wanted donors, funders, and government officials to know, is that there's obviously a higher demand for resources and assistance. Operational costs have increased for many, and some are saving by not necessarily having to buy office supplies all the time. Some are spending a lot more because of the services they're providing. Flexibility, needing to adapt, and we've seen funders do that, adjusting services and programs during high levels of stress. With those essentials like homes and food are the foundation of community health, and I think that's been part of our conversation today. And that extra funding would be put to quick use. But there's, I think, easy and quick deployment to get those resources out. And then in the next slide, the things that came across as the most important needs were a reiteration of the need for funding and flexibility for the revenue streams that are available, easing timelines and documentation requirements right now, so eliminating barriers to getting resources out, and then support and understanding from stakeholders during this time. And then on the next slide, just some comments that we received as part of the survey, some of the reflections that folks had. So organizations and leaders are resilient, innovative, and continuing forward in spite of the circumstances. And then on the flip side, COVID has kicked everyone out of the box and then burned the cardboard, And then we also saw that things are maybe delayed, but will come back stronger than ever. And that really recognizing that that we need those who are in philanthropy and who are policymakers to be stepping up in this time. We really can't do this work without them. And so, just wanted to kind of leave us there, and we'll transition now. And if you have other reflections you'd like to share throughout the conversation, please do. If there are things that you or think that we as an association need to be doing more differently to help with what you're experiencing, we'll have room to talk about that hopefully at the end. So now I want to hand things over to our policy director, Andrew Bradley. And for those who are who've been members of Prosperity Indiana, you'll know Andrew is a new face for Prosperity. He joined our team, I think filled out some paperwork at the end of February, but really showed up the first Monday of March, and had moved back to Indiana from DC, and we sent him straight to the State House. We had a lot of work to be done this last few days of the session this year. He spent most of his life in the halls until we all went back home the very next week after he started working remotely. So literally, legislative session, I think, wrapped up like late on a Wednesday. We went home on that Friday the 13th and began our work, in our little boxes from there on. And so wanted to, since he's newer to us and to you all, before he recaps 2020 a little bit and talks about where it looks like we're going for 2021, I just wanted him to provide a little more in-depth introduction about his prior experience and what brought him to Prosperity Indiana, so you guys can get to know him a little bit better. And I'll hand it over to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Jessica. Thanks for the introduction. Can people hear me okay? Well, as Jessica mentioned, I came to Prosperity Indiana at the end of February, beginning of March, right as session was ending. And as she said, I came from DC, but I'm a Hoosier by birth, education, and choice, I like to say. I had been in DC most recently working with a national organization called the National Skills Coalition, working on workforce development policy and helping states think through putting together coalitions around upskilling folks, especially adults that have low educational attainment, so they can be part of the economy. But before that, I had worked with a group in Indiana, the Indiana Institute for Working Families, for about half a dozen years on issues of low and middle income Hoosiers. And that's really where my passion is. So I'm really appreciative to be here at Prosperity, Indiana, working with members like you and thinking about how we can strengthen our communities and improve Hoosiers' lives. And I'm also really grateful to be able to be here at this really critical time. And as we'll talk about, in terms of thinking ahead to 2021 policy priorities, the task ahead of us seems to be making sure that we have strengthened that foundation that Jessica talked about, that the essentials like food and housing are that foundation of community health. And we'll need to make sure that we approach that response to COVID before we can move on to recovery. So move to the next slide. What I want to talk about very briefly is a quick snapshot of what you told us last year at this time, what you wanted to see in 2020. We know the world has changed, but we want to review where we are now, take a snapshot of a few indicators that will help us think about where priorities will be for next year. Then we'll look at a snapshot of what the policy survey results have been and give you an opportunity to weigh in. So again, we're not just talking at you. This is meant to be a conversation. There's a few ways that you can help us inform what our 2021 priorities will be. One is by participating in this discussion. Another is by making sure you fill out that policy survey so we have that data to bring to representatives like Representative Harris on the line here today. And also, we want to make sure that we keep this dialogue ongoing so that we can lift up your voices and you can be the advocates for the people that you work with in your organization and in Northwest Indiana. So just encourage to please discuss throughout. You can use the chat function. Michaela will help alert me if there's any questions that come up. And also just chime in. We'll be asking for questions throughout. So let's go ahead and take a look first at 2020, where we were before. So last year, through this process, through meetings, you told us that you wanted us to be working on affordable housing, including increasing renter protections and addressing issues that help stave off the pre-existing eviction crisis in Indiana. You told us that you wanted us to address the appraisal gap for home construction that's impeding production of new affordable housing. In terms of resources, you said you wanted us to defend key tax credit programs, such as the Individual Development Account Tax Credit and the Neighborhood Assistance Program, as well as providing momentum to enact new state tax credit programs to again support the needs of low-income households in the next budget cycle for 21. And then for consumer protection, as has been the case for several years, you, our members, told us that you wanted us to work on a 36% rate cap for payday loans and oppose expansion of predatory products, and to provide common sense safeguards against predatory rent-to-own contracts that lead to borrower and default. So that's what you told us. What ended up happening in the session, you can see over on the right, we ended up spending a lot of time, and this is really what happened, especially when I came on late in the session, doing defense against SB 340. It originated in SB 148, the eviction bill that would have preempted local tenant protections and would have actually expanded eviction opportunities. And that's what was coming on right at the end of the session. It ended up passing the General Assembly, but Governor Holcomb, we thanked him for vetoing that bill. That would have really doubled an eviction crisis just as COVID was coming into play. One bill that did pass was SB 395 on the Uniform Consumer Credit Code. That changes some rate structures. That's something that we will be working with members in terms of how that's being implemented and what the effects of that are. There were two bills that made it halfway but didn't pass that were on our radar. One was reporting of consumer loans by unlicensed lenders, which passed the Senate, failed in the House. And on the other side, land contracts passed the House, failed in the Senate. So again, what we want to do now is make sure that from here on that we're talking about what you want us to be working on in 2021 based on what you're seeing on the ground. So let's take a look at a couple of key indicators that kind of help us inform this discussion. One is, this is a brand new report from the National Low Income Housing Coalition, of which Prosperity Indiana is a member. This is the result of their 2020 Out of Reach report. You can see there's a link there on the left. You can get this data for every county in Indiana. I'm showing you the statewide results. And this shows that to afford a 2-bedroom apartment at fair market rent in Indiana, you need to make $16.32 an hour. And let me tell you that Hoosiers on average are not making $6.32 an hour. And therefore, affordable housing is out of reach in Indiana, and frankly, in every county throughout the state. So you could see that at that dollar amount, a Hoosier would have to work 73 hours per week at the minimum wage to afford a 1-bedroom apartment, and would have to work 90 hours a week to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. That's 2.3 full-time jobs just to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. At the lower right, you can see what's affordable at different levels of income in Indiana. And you can see there that that rent affordable at the 30% of area median income, you could pay $547 monthly rent. And that's quite a bit lower than the typical 1-bedroom, which is $685, and the typical 2-bedroom at $848. And for many counties in Northwest Indiana, you may be thinking already that rent is likely to be even higher than that, although the same minimum wage is still there. So that's a snapshot to show why affordable housing was out of reach even before. And we've seen a lot of income loss. A lot of low-income renters have missed months of income, paychecks, maybe lost their jobs for months at a time. Maybe they're just getting back to work, but that housing is even less affordable now. Let's take a look at the next slide, which shows us a little bit in terms of financial assets and opportunities. And again, this is where we were before COVID. So you can see here, Indiana ranked number 36 on Prosperity Now's scorecard of assets and opportunities in the U.S. And there were a few places that are of particular worry. For one, you can see that only 6 out of 10 Hoosiers had saved $400 for emergencies, and we're sitting on that. And only 37.5% had a liquid asset poverty rate. And what that means is those were the folks who did not have liquid resources saved up that would get them through a time of emergency at or above the poverty level for 3 months. So those, again, are the type of folks who have been hit by emergencies. If you've even lost 1 month of income, well, there goes any buffer that you may have had. So these are the folks who don't have the resources saved up to be able to make it through this type of economic stress event that we're seeing. You know, there's no special budget trick that they have. These are the folks who are not able to afford the basics right now. So we're going to talk about what you told us about what you want to see in terms of priorities. So let's go ahead to the next slide. The biggest issue that we have been working on since COVID came up was what is going to happen to housing, what will happen when the eviction moratorium is lifted. And we're going to find out starting tomorrow. That eviction moratorium, the governor confirmed yesterday, is going to end tomorrow on August 14th. And actually later this afternoon, I'll show you info later, that we will be hosting another webinar on what Hoosiers can expect and what service providers can do to help prepare them for that eviction cliff. But what I want to show you here is that their estimates that over 250,000 Hoosiers need emergency rental assistance in order to avoid risk of eviction and homelessness by September. And estimates from the state rental assistance program, and there's a separate Indianapolis City program, show that there's still over 200,000 Hoosiers statewide who have not received that assistance to date, even though that moratorium is lifted. On the right, that's a snapshot. We crunched data of the most housing cost burden census tracts throughout Indiana. And you can see that Lake County has one of those top 20 census tracts. But if you go to our blog, we have a spreadsheet that shows that for the entire state. And believe me when I say it reaches all parts of the state. There are places where there's housing cost burden. And we've also found that there's a disproportionate impact, especially on African American and Latino households, because they are the folks who have been hardest hit by the public health emergency. They've been hardest hit by job and income loss. And then that trickles down to housing instability as well. So we have that very much in mind as we have been trying to promote housing stability solutions. It's been something that Prosperity Indiana has convened a group we've called the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition, and we've really tried to be on top of providing responses and adapting to changing circumstances, frankly. And we're planning to come up with some new recommendations as well for what happens when that eviction pause is lifted. So with that in mind, let's take a look at what you, our members, have told us so far in terms of COVID response. So just a quick note, it's an ongoing live survey. And right now we only have 4 or 5 responses from Northwest Indiana. So I have a feeling that there's some people who are on this call that could help us fill in some data by completing that survey. So think about taking a little bit of time after today's call to fulfill that. Let's go to the next slide. Really briefly, I want to tell you, so these are some of the results that people have told us in terms of what they appreciate about Prosperity Indiana's advocacy, where they could see us continue to improve in the future. And there's a couple of themes here. You see things like housing instability, rent assistance, and that eviction moratorium comes up time and again. You also see that issue about payday lending, the 36% rate cap. These are the things that matter to our members, and this is what they're telling us that they want us to focus on. So go ahead to the next slide, and this starts to tell us, this is what people are telling us are the largest policy priorities that they see coming out of COVID. This is statewide. So number one is that rental assistance piece. They say that they want to see us continuing to advocate for more emergency rent assistance because they see a need that isn't yet fulfilled. Number two, we asked them, the number two top response we've had so far is they want us to advocate for racial equity in state and federal COVID policy response and recovery policies. Our members are telling us that they see that disparate impact and they see a disproportionate impact, especially on Black and Brown Hoosiers, and that they want us to make sure that we're advocating for policy results that address those disparities explicitly. But also, I don't want to lose that those other policy options people did think are important, including increasing COVID funding for legal assistance and for nonprofits. I think that's a reflection of what Jessica was just telling us about, that nonprofit budgets have seen a crunch and that their reserves on hand have taken a hit, and that they want to make sure that they have a voice advocating for those interests. As well as there's a specific proposal here in terms of a Neighborhood Housing Investment Act to revitalize housing in distressed neighborhoods. We think that could play a part in an overall housing stability policy response, especially at the federal level, and supporting consumer protections on federal stimulus payments. This is an area where Prosperity Indiana has been working to make sure that federal stimulus payments aren't subject to creditors coming in and basically scooping those out before Hoosiers have the opportunity to use them to pay for basic needs like housing and food, et cetera. All right, so next slide, this is where I'm going to ask for the first time for your input. These are the results of the 4 Northwest Indiana responses we've received so far. You'll see they're the same categories as before. They look a little different from what we saw at the state level. So this is where I want to turn it to you. Like, does this reflect what you are seeing and where your priorities are? And is there anything missing that you want us to be focusing on in terms of a COVID policy response, especially for Northwest Indiana? One thing that was surprising to me, I'll say, is that state and city emergency rental assistance was the lowest. It looks like only 2 folks out of those 4 rated that highly. Does that make sense? Is that what you're seeing? Or should it be higher for Northwest Indiana?
I'd like to see that higher from my perspective.
Why is that, Linda?
Oh, just, again, just taking a pulse of the community here, it's pretty far reaching. The scope of it is pretty daunting. And I took a quick look at the data that you shared from the report, pulled it up for Marshall County, and it's one thing that COVID-19 has done is magnify some of the issues that were there before, and this is one of those cases, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the first and the third one, so the emergency rental assistance, but then also the Housing Investment Act, I think those have to go together because the emergency rental assistance is a short-term Band-Aid to get us through this crisis. But when you look at, how do we create a long-term solution so that we don't end up here again, that's where we really need to focus on the Housing Investment Act.
I think that's a really great point. I think that that's something that we've been trying to emphasize, that we need to have that, again, that foundation of an equitable response, and then use that as a way to get back to recovery. And I think that's exactly right, that replenishing and building on that housing stock is going to be key to recovery. And frankly, we may folks who may not have needed affordable housing before. And I think before we get there, then that piece is there too. Any other reflections about how this reflects what you're seeing in Northwest Indiana? And is anything missing?
Andrew, could you help me understand the one that says support consumer protections on federal stimulus payments? I'm not sure I understand the concern. Is that fighting fraud with like unemployment?
The consumer protection piece, that was actually something, and I know, Jessica, you participated in this effort. You might be able to speak to it specifically, that there was a petition to make sure that in Indiana that creditors couldn't come in and take federal stimulus payments.
Okay.
Jessica, is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, we already were part of a request to the court, that was granted to protect that pretty early on.
Thanks, that makes a lot of sense.
And something
so, yeah,
else that all. Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, so some of that is, is something we've already responded with, but as different things, come down the pike, is that a place we still need to be intervening and making sure we're doing protection.
And I will say this is an area where last week we participated with our Indiana Assets and Opportunities Network in a nationwide week of action where they had some specific asks at the federal level to try to make sure that the next COVID relief bill includes some additional consumer protection. So that's, I think in the short term, this has really been focused at the state level to make sure that those stimulus payments aren't open for garnishment, at the federal level to try to provide some additional guardrails in relief packages. And I could see this translating to next session to making sure that we don't allow new predatory products to then come in and further destabilize what consumers are.
I also think the advocate for racial equity in policy response shouldn't necessarily be, I think it needs to be part of each one of those. So it's not a standalone, it's within every single one. So that needs to be there no matter what. But it needs to be ingrained in whichever priority area is chosen.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think we wanted to find a way to explicitly, to have an opportunity for people to mark that is a priority of theirs. But absolutely, it's not a competing priority. It's something that has to be infused in all the others.
Right.
All right, let's go ahead and move forward. We're going to have other opportunities for people to chime in. So if we didn't catch your response, keep going. So then we're going to talk about what respondents said about state policy priorities. Now, this is for 2021 as a whole. You can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So of the 30 or so responses that we've received so far, you'll start to hear some patterns. The top vote getters that we've received include seeking a 36% rate cap for payday loans and opposing predatory products. That continues to be a really strong priority amongst our members. And that's tied currently with increasing renter protection. So that was a priority that we had even again before COVID, but it has risen to the top of people's concerns for next year. Other top vote getters include making it easier for local communities to fund land banking efforts, as well as providing momentum for new affordable housing tax credit fees. So these are the things that people want to make sure end up on our state policy agenda for 2021. And so I'd like to turn it back to you as our members. Are there any of these that really speak to what you think is important? You know, and I think this is something either that's carrying forward through COVID, like we just heard, it, or infused with new momentum and urgency. Anything else that you want to make sure that we are, the messages that we're able to carry forward to our representatives like Representative Harris on the line? And actually, at this point, Representative Harris, I'd be interested to get your reflections in terms of what you've seen so far from COVID response and our state priorities.
Thank you. Sorry, I had to unmute myself here. Thank you for putting all this together. This looks great. One of the things I want to add in, as you look at what you're doing and focusing on, you know, one of the things and I'm sorry, I forgot whom talked about, it might have been Kathy. Someone talked about workforce development. When you look at things that will help a lot of these issues, education, workforce development, and opportunity, especially when we look at the minority community, and people that we call essential workers that are not making as much money, anything that helps in terms of people have greater career opportunity, that's going to be a huge benefit and will help out with a lot of the things that you're focusing on. So I just want to kind of share that and kind of put that on your radar, because if people are making more money and you know, obviously we're talking about Northwest Indiana, people are making more money and have better career opportunities, they're going to have savings in place. So when we have a situation like this, they're not as desperate financially, you know, which will help with whether it's rental or house payment or whatever, food, etc. So I would really suggest putting that on your radar. One of the other things, and I've been saying this to people as we've been having these kind of meetings, is the areas you are focusing on your policy. If you haven't started, I would suggest start, you know, for lack of a better way to phrase it, pounding on the doors of people like people in the position that I am, because this session is going to be, my word is interesting. If I use the word interesting, I think everyone understands the meaning behind that. It's going to be interesting because of what COVID-19 has done to the state, what it has done to the budget, is going to mean there's going to be a lot of hard pushing by a lot of groups. I mean, I'm already working on some of my initiatives. So I would suggest do that. And then I would suggest look at maybe what partners you have, and if there are some new partners that you can partner up on, because my theory is the more people pushing the rock up the hill, the better. So kind of think about that as well. And I don't, you know, I know some of the conversations I've had of things that people are talking about, but there may be some things that people are going to try to push, especially since this is a budget year coming up, budget session, to get done. And we don't know, and I'll share this with you, we don't know at this point, unless something has been decided here recently by the speaker, et cetera, what session will look like and how, you know, those normal communication contacts, if those will even take place. I mean, like a lot of groups will be out in the rotunda and have lunches and things like that. Well, will we have that? Well, you know, will session, how will presentations be in committees? So start that's also why I suggest being, get on the ball if you haven't already, of working and being in communication with electeds, because we don't know what this is going to be like, and you don't want to get caught limited just because of COVID and what it has meant to everybody. So just a few suggestions to throw out there.
And thank you for all that, Representative Harris. And actually, that's something we have later on, is that we have a date for a State House Day. We don't know exactly what that'll look like, but we are, we're trying to think through, like, we're committed to making sure that our members and their constituents' voices are heard with folks like yourself. And it's going to probably take some creativity and determination to bring them together. So thanks for that.
Sure.
Any other member reflections about what was just said? I think it's really interesting what you talked about, that connection to like education and workforce, and providing economic opportunities. I'd be interested to hear what people have to say. I think that from our history as an organization, there's also that interest to make sure that that consumer protection piece, making sure that there's not a drain on the bottom end of people's financial resiliency. Like, they can't make it through an education and training program if a payday loan is, putting them into a debt trap beforehand. Anybody have any other reflections on what? Go for it.
This is all new for me. I would say our little community foundation has spent a lot more time operating scholarship funds than any other thing, and COVID has brought our responsibility to protect our communities to the forefront of how we operate, and that's different for my entire board, different for my community, and there seems to be this component of just knowing my rural communities and the way they are. We are predominantly white, but we have just as many predatory humans here feeding on our neighbors through some of these very similar situations. Our students aren't receiving the best education possible to bridge a gap. But as far as having more economic opportunities for a better job, I mean, we have what we have until we attract more here, or we just resign ourselves to losing all of our community members to other places, which isn't an option for me. And then the education component of breaking that poverty cycle doesn't go away simply with a higher paycheck, or the mindset of lack of things isn't broken by a kid getting a trades training, but still deciding he can't do it, so he's just not going to do anything. So I feel like there's some other creative things that we should think about in those education components, and just knowing, like, right now there are a bazillion resources available here that I am learning, but the gap is getting the people who need it most to the resource itself. And I get phone calls now at least once a week for somebody wants mortgage assistance. Well, I don't do that. And also the organizations that are placed here in my community to do that either exist in a different county, or they aren't doing their job because the individuals in my community don't know where these resources are. So I don't know if this has anything to do with the chart on the screen, but these are just some of the challenges we're trying to work through here as far as our foundation goes, and realizing that our community foundation is literally the largest funder and resource in Jasper and Newton counties. Everything else is smaller than us. So the responsibility for us to know things and be a pivotal entity, like, that just went through the roof this year. So the learning curve is huge. So I appreciate all of you here, because this is going to be really great to learn. So those are just some of the challenges we're dealing with a little further south, Northwest Indiana. So.
Oh, thank you very much for that. Oh, I was just going to say very briefly, like, that does remind me that's been a real issue, is the idea of connecting people to resources that are available, and did remind me of this state rental assistance program. There's a website out there, and there was a big rush of applications to begin with that dropped off. I mean, it's been steady, but I think we have reason to believe that there's a lot of folks that are in need that don't know about those resources. But I heard somebody else wanting to jump in.
That was me, Andrew, Jessica. I just, that reminded me of Brianne's conversation and then some other things that folks have mentioned, because in terms of what we do, in terms of policy priorities, we pick a few so that it's clear what we're focused on. We used to support everything and we kind of got lost in the mix. But I think one of the things that we can do is partner. We are trying to do one, partner with unusual partners, and I think that speaks to what Paris was talking about. And so that some of that's emerging. Where do we find the one common thing that we can focus on together? And then two, some of our partners that might be the natural lead on something, supporting their work, even if we're not leading every effort. We see that the intersections in our work in other, sectors very clearly. And in terms of resources, one of the collaboration pieces that I kind of mentioned was that we are now part of a COVID recovery coalition that is made up of other Indiana statewide associations. And so some folks are folks that we worked with before, but not as deeply. And some are brand new, for us to work alongside. And so the Indiana Philanthropy Alliance and the Indiana Economic Development Association and the Regional Planning Commissions Association and the Counties Association and the Library Association and Public Health Association and AIM, the Cities and Towns. And there are some that I'm not thinking of right off the top of my head. And then we also have some state agencies that are part of that. Secretary Blair Milo is participating every other week in those, so that gets to the talent element of the work. And so, we're doing things that might not be very visible, but we are connecting our associations and networks in new ways. And we will be launching together a shared resource where you might reach out to Prosperity for something we're known for, which, is housing. But then we on the back end have this shared website where we can refer you to something you might normally need from the economic development folks, or the library folks who are boosting Wi-Fi right now. So just wanted to point that out that there are ways that we're going to be resourcing other groups that you might be part of because our membership is so broad and kind of fits across those sectors. So.
Jessica, that's very helpful. No, that's very helpful to hear that, and I'm assuming Indiana United Ways is part of that coalition as well, and because they've been a strong partner throughout this. One thing I'm not sure that we've touched on yet that I think is part of the communication issue. I mean, food and shelter certainly are basic needs, but I think that the thing that I keep coming back to is that our brains work differently when we're in crisis. And this is one of those, I've been through 2 disaster relief efforts prior to this. And remember hearing that as we watched people struggle through a year-long process to recover from a tornado, right? But I think about that in this context, and I think it makes the communication and connecting people with those resources that much more difficult, is that their brains are not maybe working like they would under other circumstances. So I applaud the efforts at the state level. The Be Well Indiana website, I think, is something that we keep pushing here for people to reach out and get help when they need it. But I think it does also have implications for the work that we're trying to do to connect people with those resources when and where they need them.
Thank you for that.
I know.
I was just going to do a quick time check. We have 10 minutes left. I do want to make sure to acknowledge we had a comment come in from Anna Schoon, who says she's not in a place to unmute, but wants to add that these low-paying jobs that we're talking about are also classified as essential. So just helping people get better-paying jobs does not solve the problem. We need essential jobs to pay a living wage. And I think that's important to acknowledge, that we want to make sure that all people have access to these basic needs. no matter what job or what circumstance they're in. I also want to recognize, my understanding is that we have Representative Chris Chung on the phone, but not on video. And I want to create a space, Representative Chung, if you have any reflections to jump in, and then we do have a couple more slides we want to hit. All right, if you get this, feel free to jump in, but let's go ahead and move on to a few more places, and we'll have a few more opportunities for people to provide input. So let's go ahead to the next slide. We won't go through as many little points here. I just want to show you, to give people a sense for what our responses have been. And again, plug, please go ahead and fill out this survey so that we can get your input. So in terms of federal priorities, we are again getting, there's a lot of interest in providing federal funding for community development programs, for funding a program for temporary financial assistance for renters experiencing economic shock. So again, a pattern there. Protecting the lowest incomes from rent increases or work requirements that do not improve self-sufficiency. So I think that again reflects that point of like even people who are in lowest income need to make sure that they have opportunities for housing stability in the short and long term. Let's go ahead while we're here and keep moving forward. And we also have a place for administrative priorities. And the top vote getters there so far, one has been informing the Indiana Affordable Housing and Community Development Fund priorities. That's a mouthful, but that's something that, you know, our members so far are saying is really important. They want to see us addressing that at an administrative level, as well as to responding to federal consumer protection rules and regulations. There's a few places there you may have seen the CRA rule came out that has some really damaging implications for communities. We've been trying to work with elected officials to sign on to letters there. So if any of the elected officials here would be interested in signing on, we can definitely put you in touch with the people at the national level to make your voice heard there, as well as reducing the administrative burdens placed on local service providers. And this is something that we've heard come up in a few ways. And I want to forward a comment that we had about that. We found some members saying that they found that it was really burdensome for them to participate in a commenting process and then feeling like the time that they spent putting into that were not reflected in the final results. So there may even be some interest in doing some reform of how that process works. So let me pause for just a sec. Any reflections on federal or administrative policies before we move on to a few final wrap-up items? Okay, then let me tell you about a few things that we have coming up on the horizon. First, I want to make sure to plug, if you haven't signed up yet, please make sure that you and all the folks from your organization and even other people who may just be interested in these issues sign up to receive our updates and alerts. That's how we pass on action alerts. You can sign up for our voter voice. That's the way, a portal for you to directly reach out to your representatives at the state and federal level. We also have a Facebook group that we're looking for ways to increase some more informal and regular communication. Something coming up in the future on the next slide. Last year at this time, we had policy and pizza meetings. We're not sure exactly how pizza will look like in the COVID area, but this is another way that we want to make sure that we present the final results of that survey to not only our members, but also to their representatives. So Representative Harris, I think that's another way that we already are building in a way to make sure that we keep in touch with you and your colleagues at the State House and the congressional delegation. Moving on, you can set your calendar. We have reserved a day for State House Day. Again, we are not sure exactly what that's going to look like, but even if it's virtual, we want to make sure that we present that agenda and our priorities as the new session starts next year. We've also reserved Wednesday, January 13th for Prosperity Indiana Summit. Last year we were at Union Station. I think things may look a little different in 2021, but again, we are committed to delivering that value to you as members and to representing your voices to policy makers. And so I will just finish with one more plug. Please complete that policy survey on the next slide. Again, this afternoon, we're having that webinar on what to expect when that moratorium lifts. And there's still a few spots left, so go to our website and sign up for that. And with that, let me turn it over to Rita and then to Jessica to wrap us up.
Hi, this is Rita. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. If I haven't already met with you, please give me a call. I'm meeting with members one-on-one just to get a better feel for your world. I see, Brianne, we actually just met yesterday, and it was a great meeting. Kathy, Annie, Clarence, and Mark. I think it's going to be the 26th or 27th. We're in the process of getting that scheduled right now, but it's just been a really wonderful opportunity. I've met with probably 60 members in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Just a half an hour, it won't take long, but it's just a really good time for you to tell us what you think you like, what we can do better, and I can help you navigate through the portal and just help you really maximize your engagement. That's all I have. Great. Thanks, Rita. Also, we'll resend that policy survey link just so everybody has it.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So want to thank our team and all of you who've joined today. We've heard some of the challenges that you face in your communities and some of the things that you've made work, and maybe even work better in light of COVID-19. And so that's great to hear. And we've also talked about, what we've seen rise up as some of the policy priorities in light of COVID-19. And thank you, Rep. Harris, for urging us to get ahead of the game this year, so that it will look different or interesting, in the coming year. And it's already interesting, so I can't even imagine what it's going to be like in the coming year. And so, if there's anything that we haven't been able to cover today that you wanted to, hear about or discuss, please reach out. We'd love to hear, from folks. And then, but just wanted to really thank you, appreciate the work that you're doing. You really are making a difference, whether you are a service provider, a bank partner, a foundation doing, supporting the work, a legislator who's been elected to serve. We really appreciate the work you're doing. We want to come alongside and support your work as much as possible. So thank you for your participation. Please meet with Rita if she reaches out to you. And then just stay in contact, and we'll let us know how we can be helpful. So have a great day, everyone. We really appreciate you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.